speaker, local researcher Jeanette Lunn, to hear an amazing story with details of the sensational new twist in a local Titanic-related death. It was launched at the Eastside Lives Heritage Trail in an online presentation in early August, and I tuned in for that. And I was absolutely taken aback when I heard this story from one of the researchers recounting the tale of the amazing discovery whilst delving into the family background of a Titanic victim. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this riveting tale. Over to you, Jeanette.
Thank you very much, Maureen. That was very funny with your riveting tale. Yes, hello, welcome. My name is Jeanette Lunn, as Maureen says. I live in Newtonards, which is just outside Belfast, with my 3 sons and dog. And the reason I got into this in the first place was just really my interest in history. When I was at school, it was one of my favourite subjects. I've always been a nosy Parker. I like knowing people's business, interested in people. So to find out a bit more about anybody really is something I love doing. So last year, there was an advert appeared on Facebook from the Eastside Partnership from Lisa Ray Curry, looking for volunteers to help put together a trail of people in East Belfast. We could choose anybody we wanted. It could be somebody famous, somebody not so famous, anybody we liked at all, really. And she was going to give us the help as to how we could do the research, the different online places to search for information, birth certificates, burial records, etc. So I had worked at Titanic Belfast for 7 years. I'd always been interested in the ship and the shipyard, and also got the privilege of working on board the Nomadic as well, the last White Star liner still in one piece, which was wonderful. So I had the interest in the Titanic. So I thought to myself, maybe Samuel Joseph Scott. We always spoke about him being the youngest person to be killed under the construction of the ship, only 15 years old, very sad. So I thought, well, I'll maybe research him, but then decided that, as we know, women aren't mentioned an awful lot in history. They seem to disappear. So I thought, well, maybe I'll research his mother. So that's what I did. I didn't expect to find out very much information. It's probably a housewife, mother, not probably no revelations would appear, but I thought, at least we can find out how maybe women lived back in Victorian Edwardian Belfast. So as you can see on the screen here, this is the Eastside Lives Heritage Trail here, along with another 11 volunteers. You can see their lovely happy faces there on the screen. They all chose people, various people, family members, Horatio Todd, people that you may have heard of, and then others that you haven't, and delved into their history. It was fascinating insight into the people of East Belfast. And a trail was created, you can see my mug there beside on the wall, of street art. So there was a silhouette of the actual person was put beside me on the wall, put beside the plaque on the wall, and then a plaque with information. So anybody that wants to go there, you just go along to the Eastside Centre, pick up a map, and take yourself around the tour. It takes maybe about 3 hours. It's fully accessible. But if you can't get there, obviously with COVID, everybody's in the house at the minute, you can follow on Izzy Travel at the bottom of the screen there, and it can actually sort of take you a virtual tour around. Okay, folks, it's fascinating stuff, but that's how we got started. And because all the silhouettes are placed in around the area where the people lived, Jane there, this is her, this I'm about to talk about, is Samuel's mother. So this is like a silhouette of what we think she might have looked like. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide there. It's not letting me move on. Oh, there we go. Okay, folks, so Samuel Joseph Scott. Everybody knows about Samuel Joseph Scott. You can see his gravestone up there in Belfast City Cemetery. Okay, so he died, as everybody knows or thinks he knows, 20th of April 1910, falling from the gantry. We can see there's the Earl Gantry in the middle. It's something that children are always taught in school as well, that he was the first young boy to be killed. And then you can see on the right-hand side there, people have maybe read this book. Nicola Pearce wrote in 2011, The Spirit of the Titanic. It's a wonderful novel. It's loosely based, sort of inspired by Samuel Joseph Scott. It's a fiction book, but it's based sort of inspired by him. Okay, so she's written this book in 2011. So all these things together sort of also inspired me to choose him and choose his mother. So there we go. So at the bottom you can see is, if you want to check any of the photographs, all published on the www.nmni.com website, to their photo catalogue. Okay, we'll move on to the next one here. Okay, so Samuel's mother was called, I found out, was called Jane McCourt. Okay, she was born in Belfast, and she married, oh, hang on, let's see. She married William James in 1878. So this was her husband at the time, her first husband. She married him, and then they went on to have these children down the side of the screen here. So she, all in all, she did actually have, she had 12 children. Okay, so Richard Gould, I put here, is, I'm trying to think, is one of the ancestors of Jane, who lives in Canada at the minute, who provided me with these photos underneath. So we have William James is on the right there, and Robert comes next, John next, Annie next. Annie is the one on the left there, that's Annie Scott. Alexander, Edward, Marianne, and Jane. So that's all Jane and William's children together. Okay, so, and this was, I've been able to trace most of all those siblings, I think, yeah, to what they went on to do and where they were buried and the sort of lives that they had. Okay, so moving on to the next one. Okay, so whenever they first got married in 1878, they set up home on the Shankill Road on the Ariel Street area of Belfast. But about 1890, they moved over to East Belfast to Bridgend. Okay, so this is where they ended up in Donegal Street. Okay, so these are two images I've just found here of the end of Donegal Street leading on to McMichael Street, which the little railway bridge is still actually there. So these are, I thought these were rather nice. It gives you a good idea of what it looked like at the time. But the reason that Jane and William moved over to Donegal Street was because family lived there. And in those days, obviously, families helped each other out. They all lived very close by to each other, so maybe to help with childcare, things like that. So it was what you did in those days. Families looked after each other. Maybe they don't do it so much now, but in those days they did, because they didn't have a choice. You know, if women had to go out to work, somebody had to look after their children. It was a very close-knit community. So I think these photos are very good there. So I've taken this wee quote from, I think it was the Belfast Telegraph from 1888. Bit of it's covered, my screen's covered with some faces here, but I'll try and read it. It is a respectable thoroughfare, the houses being in most part inhabited by industrious working men. The street is second on the right side after, well, I can't read that bit, Queensbridge. One of Mr. Fullen's public houses is situated at the corner, and in order to reach any something or other houses in the street, it is necessary to pass under the central railway bridge. So it was a working class street. You can see all the people out there. I want to move on to the next screen. It'll give us a little idea of who lived in the houses there. Okay, there we go. So this is Donegal Street. Now, the map on the left shows you McMichael Street, which was the main street running down. Donegal Street's the first one across. So if we look down the list of inhabitants there, number 4, you can see William John Scott. That's Samuel's father. Beside him, John Alexander Scott, strangely no relative, but he is actually married to Jane's sister, Selina. So Jane lives beside her sister. And at number 14, down at the bottom there, we can see John McCourt. So that's Jane's much loved brother. So the three of them all live very, very close to each other. There's also in McMichael Street, number 13, sorry, was where one of the local midwife lived, delivered all the babies in the area. Obviously, she was an unofficial midwife. So she opened her house up to all the pregnant mothers in the area, and they were just babies coming in and out the swinging door. So that's where a lot of the Scots children were born, and the McCourt's children were born. Okay, so I'll move on to the next screen here. Now, this was an interesting thing that happened in October 1888 in McMichael Street. There was a man who was arrested under suspicion of being the Jack the Ripper. Apparently there was about 100 men were arrested suspected of being Jack the Ripper, but this was one. But it happened in number 11 McMichael Street, which was just right beside where the Scots lived. So they would have been part of all this drama. So I've taken a couple of excerpts there from two newspapers. If you get to read it yourself, I think the one on the Belfast Telegraph, the one on the left, it gives a fascinating insight into this man. And whenever they went up and they found him, he had a razor blade with blood on it inside his bag. He described himself as a gentleman, so he was arrested and taken away. But to think that this all happened where the Scots lived kind of makes it, you can imagine the drama that would have been unfolding that day. So it kind of gives you an idea of what the street was like, with a lot of hustle and bustle and a lot going on. Okay, so sadly, this is when we come to this first tragedy of the whole thing. William and Jane were happily married. As I say, they'd had, by that stage, 8 children together. But on Monday, the 17th of July, Friday, sorry, the 14th of July, 1894, William went for a walk. Okay, he was 34 at the time, went for a walk, and he never came back. He never returned. He had taken himself off, and he had been found, his body was found by a man walking his dog on the limestone road. He had he died from overexposure and strangulation of his neck by his collar. As you know, then in those days, collars were separate from your shirt. But it all seems very suspicious. There was no reason why he would have, anything that could have happened to him, that, none of it made any sense. So his body was taken to a local public house. And as I say, this is where I sort of the research element came into it. I went to the Public Records Office in Belfast, PRONI here, and was able to find William John Scott's coroner's report as to how he died, and I hold it in my hand, which was unbelievably exciting. And it detailed everything to what he had in his pocket, the contents of his pockets, to how his body was found. And also we see here, brother James was the one who identified his body. So James has made a comment on here saying that he was always a sober man. He didn't suspect any foul play. There's nothing that seemed suspicious to him, which I think is quite interesting. So I thought this was quite fascinating. It's the first tragic thing that happened to poor Jane. So once this happened, she was left with no husband, no breadwinner. But even more tragic was the fact that she was about 6 months pregnant at the time with their 9th child. Okay, so obviously this wasn't good news. So luckily, James, the younger brother, stepped in. He took Jane and all the children into his home in Vernon Street in Belfast. So they didn't have to, pretty much straight away, actually. So I'll move on to the next week. There we go. And who was born on the 20th of November, 1894, but our very own Samuel Joseph Scott. Okay, so this was him. So poor Jane, she'd had a horrible year, but here comes Samuel Joseph Scott, whose father you can see here is down as William John Scott, deceased, only just deceased as well. Okay, so I found any of these records I found on the website irishgenealogy.ie as well. Okay, so this is our Samuel Joseph Scott, just born 20th of November, 1894. Okay, move on to the next screen. So this is Vernon Street. So James had a house in Vernon Street, which was just over the other side of the bridge in Belfast, just near the markets area. So the whole family moved in there, put a little bit of a map on. And we can see at the bottom, hopefully you can see, it might be quite small, the inhabitants of the house. Okay, you have James, Jane, all the other children who are still left there. And we have Joseph at the bottom, George and Selina. Okay, these are sort of the new children who've been born to Jane and James. Okay, so Joseph Scott, the Samuel Joseph who was born that we know of was never called Samuel. He was always known as Joseph. Never used his first name, always his middle name. So that's why sometimes as well, this evidence has been a bit confusing. So there we see him there, Joseph Scott. Okay, so he was born 1894. His younger brother George, younger brother George, sorry, in 1896, and then Selina comes along afterwards, all in Vernon Street. Okay, and as I say, the information we've got there from lennonwiley.com. Okay, so as I say, Jane and James had 3 children together. George, born in 1896, Selina, 26th of December 1898, and Victor in 1902. Okay, but as you can see, I put the birth record here of George. Now, this is the one that we want to bear in mind. This is young George. Okay, he'd be very close in age to Samuel Joseph, only 2 years of a difference. So they would have looked very similar. And also in the little photo you can see beside here, I have put, this is Annie Scott, the oldest of the girl of Jane. And beside her is Selina. So this is Selina. Selina is one of James's children there. So I just thought I managed to get the photo from Peter Talbot, who is also one of the ancestors of the Scots. Okay, so this is George. So we'll bear him in mind as we move on here. There we go. Now, these are lovely photos. I just like the photos, to be honest with you. I just think they're wonderful. So the photo on the left there, up in the top left-hand corner, is William James Scott, Jane and William's eldest son. And because families were close in those days, as I was saying earlier, William actually married his cousin. So there she is in the middle there, this Annie Barber McCourt, who then became Annie Scott. So he married her, so that she is actually Jane's daughter-in-law and niece. So they were married about 1907, I think. And then I've put another photo in the middle there of William James and Annie. And then the one on the right-hand side, I think is lovely, is of Annie, all the generations. So the little girl that Annie is sitting with the big bow in her hair is Madeline. And the little boy on the right is, trying to remember now, Samuel Joseph, I think. Was that right? Yeah. So, but sadly, just before this photo, Annie had lost two little boys, one not even 1 year old and one just 1 year old, just before this photograph was taken. So it's all quite, in those days, things like that did happen. So, well, but I think those are lovely photos, and I was quite glad to get these photos as well. They're very special. So we'll move on to the next one here. Right, here's some more family. So then we've got, again, on the left-hand side, there's Annie and Samuel and Madeline. And then there's Jane's sister, who's also called Madeline. So they all moved away to Canada in about 1915. After all these, she'd lost her two sons. Too many things had happened. A lot of the family all moved to Canada at that time. So the photo, the lovely photo you can see up there, the black and white one, is of the two sisters taken around 1950s somewhere. So that's Annie on the left and Madeline on, no, sorry, Annie's on the right and Madeline on the left. So that's them in years to come. I just think that's a lovely photo, just to sort of show the, the rest of the family there. And behind them, there's four brothers. So these were all Jane's nieces and nephews. Okay, so as everything was going pretty well, 1907, sadly, James was to lose his life as well. He died 1907, leaving Jane again with no breadwinner, nobody to bring any money into the household, all the children still there. Where was she to go? So what happened was her eldest daughter, Annie Scott, who was then Annie Foster, who married Samuel Foster, who's up in the top corner there, took them into their house in 104 Templemore Street, just over in East Belfast, along with all her other children. So you can imagine how cramped that would have been, but they had no choice. You sort of looked after your family, and that's what you did. So say this is the Fosters, where this is who they've moved in with. So this is around, this census here was 1911, but we'll come to that later, because if you look at the bottom there, you'll see we've got all the children there again. The last two children are Joseph and Victor. Okay, but we'll come back to that in a minute when we're sussing things out. Okay, then as we all know, sadly, the next tragic thing to happen to poor Jane was April the 20th in 1910. Jane waved her son, Samuel, or Joseph, off to work that morning at Harlan Wolff, where he worked, along with actually Samuel Foster, and his other brother William had worked there. So it was probably part of a little family team. So she waved him off to work that morning on the 20th of April. The next time she was to see him was to identify his body later in the Royal Victoria Hospital. So poor Samuel, or Joseph, had fallen from the gantry. Nobody had seen him fall. They'd just seen his body when he was lying there. There was no witnesses to the actual fall itself. But he had died straight away of a fractured skull. So those are the two little excerpts I've put from the Telegraph and the newsletter there. One of them you'll see actually he's called Joseph. There's a few inconsistencies. The address is wrong in the right hand one, but at least we get to see Jane mentioned here. Okay, so she identified his body. She said that was her son, Samuel Joseph, accidentally fell from a ladder on the staging while working at Queen's Yard. So first young man to be killed in the construction of the Titanic. So the two, you can access these in the British Newspaper Archive as well, newspaper excerpts. So that was our Samuel. This is the story we all know. Okay, so this is me beside Samuel Scott, buried there in plot number D456, okay, along with his father, William John Scott, who had died in suspicious circumstances, and Elizabeth Scott, we think, could have been a grandparent. We're not 100% sure. So this is his burial plot here. So this is in Belfast City Cemetery. This was only taken about a month ago there. Okay, so sadly, poor Jane, once she'd heard her son had lost his life, it was even more tragic for her, because in Victorian times, children were dying all the time, but she'd managed to raise all her 12 children. No, they'd all survived infancy, but her first one was to die at the age of 15. So poor Jane was absolutely devastated. She was offered 16 shillings compensation after his death, which was a pittance. So she kind of basically lost the plot. She was seen turning her mangle in her backyard, staring into space. She apparently put a curse on the Titanic. This was the thing that's passed down through the family. She wished that no good would ever come of the ship because she'd lost her poor son. And then sadly, Jane then died just before Christmas in 1911, the year after her son's Samuel Joseph. Okay, so she's buried here in Dundonald Cemetery. You can see up there, plot E3353, along with her son, Robert Nevin Scott, a good friend, Elizabeth Sloan, and John Barber Scott and Samuel John Scott, the two little grandsons who died tragically as well. So they're all buried together in Dundonald Cemetery. Okay, so I think that was the end of that. But I thought that was the end of the story, and that, you know, it was tragic enough that Jane had cursed the ship. That was the interesting thing, the fact that she didn't know that Titanic had sank. She died before it happened. So I thought I'd like to dig a bit deeper and see what else I can find out. So I checked the internet and found the unveiling of Samuel Joseph's headstone in July 2011. Okay, and it mentioned that there was a member of Samuel's family was there, and there she is. This is Margaret Donnelly. Okay, so she was Samuel's niece, and you can see there as well Nicola Pearce, the author of Spirit of Titanic, and along with Tom Hartley, councillor and politician. But up in the right-hand corner there is my favourite person in the whole world, Gerard Anderson, because without him, I wouldn't have found anything else that I've found out. He has been an absolute hive of information. So he is, when I contacted him, I got to him through Facebook. His great uncle, then he told me, was Samuel Joseph Scott, who died building the Titanic. So that was, he said, yes, he is my great uncle. So I said, oh, well, that's very interesting. What was your great granddad called? And he said, he was also called Samuel Joseph Scott. I said, well, that's rather strange. Two brothers with the same name. But apparently, Maureen was saying as well, this does happen. But I thought that seems weird to me. And he says, yes, we always thought that was rather strange. We thought maybe one brother was called Samuel, one was called Joseph. So I thought, that doesn't add up. So started delving a bit deeper. I asked Gerard if he had any evidence about his grandfather, anything he could show me, and he produced this. So this is the baptism record for Samuel Joseph Scott, born 23rd November 1894, to William John Scott and Jane McCourt. This was his grandfather, but this was our Samuel. This is the Samuel who died under the construction of the Titanic. But I said, surely you've got mixed up. He says, no, this is my granddad's baptism record. So then I started becoming very suspicious. I thought, how could there be two brothers with the same name? Nothing was making any sense. But this is what made it all seem a lot more suspicious. So then again, I looked at the 1901 census. If you remember, they were living in, where was it then? They were living in Vernon Street, yes. So we have at the very bottom again, you can see Joseph, George, and Selena. Okay, Joseph is our Samuel. Okay, so this was 1901. So we move on to the next one. Okay, so this is 1911. So remember, this is the year after Samuel lost his life. We see at the bottom again, Joseph and Victor. George has disappeared. George has totally disappeared. And it took a while to actually realize this could be what might have happened. But George has never been, nobody in the family has heard of a George. They know all the other brothers and sisters, Minnie's, Jane's, anybody's aunties and uncles. Nobody ever heard of a George. So this was when I started to think maybe there had been a switch. The fact also that Jane was only offered 16 shillings would also mean that perhaps George, the son that she lost, was too young to actually be officially working at the yard, so would have been under 14, which George would have been. He would have been 13. So this was what none of the family could understand this either. Nobody understood why Joseph 1 minute was there when he was meant to have died, and he was still there the next year. Okay, so now we know that Joseph Scott survived, and he didn't die that day in April 1910. I asked Gerard then if he had any information about his granddad. So he lived to a good old age. These photos are wonderful. This is Samuel Joseph Scott. Here on the left-hand side, he married Margaret Enright. 30th of November 1918 in Canada. They moved all away to Canada to start a life up there as well, as along with a lot of the rest of the family. So you can see his marriage certificate there too. So, you know, this is the fascinating thing, because he went on to live a long life. So if you look at those wee photos, I'll move them on to the next one here. Okay, so Samuel Joseph Scott didn't die on that day in April 1910, went on, married. These are his children. So we have Margaret Mary, Margaret Jane, Victor and Austin. Okay, these are all the photos. The top right-hand photo, I think, is Austin. So this is something you could see Samuel Joseph just there behind his wife and his son in the middle photograph. And that's his young son working outside Ewing's fish shop just there in Belfast. So these photos were amazing. I was able to get these from Jared, and relatives of his were able to pull all these together for me. So just so that we know that Samuel Joseph Scott existed for a lot longer than we thought. Okay, next page we have. Okay, so this is Samuel Joseph Scott fighting at the home front in the 1940s. He fought for the Home Guard, protecting the country. Okay, so those are good photos as well, actually. So as I say, there's no evidence really. That the evidence is all pointing towards the fact that George was the one who died that day and Samuel was the one who didn't. Okay, so the next slide, this is our last one here. Okay, so this is wonderful. This is Samuel Joseph Scott. This was taken, I think, maybe in the 1950s, probably around 60 years old. He was in this photograph. Okay, so he was born 20th of November 1894, died 21st of July 1968. He is actually buried in Milltown Cemetery, plot MG 6B, and he's buried along actually with his sister-in-law, strangely. So if we're to take, what we've done is as well, Mark Doherty has looked into it as well, that he is actually buried in two different places. He's Milltown Cemetery, because whenever he married his wife Margaret, he converted to Catholicism. He was Protestant before that, so that's why he's buried in Milltown Cemetery. And he lived a long life till he was 73 years old. But there's Irish legend states that a seventh son has special powers that can bring luck with them. Now, the seventh son of Jane would have been George, okay? But Samuel, or Joseph here that we see, until the day he died, wore a necklace around his neck with seventh son of a seventh son on it, which wasn't him. He wasn't the seventh son. So whatever happened, he's taken it from George or whatever, you know, somehow he's got a hold of it and he's worn it to the day he died. His granddaughter remembers him wearing it all the time. So this poor Samuel here has had to live, the whole family then had to live with knowing what had gone on. So that's why Jared told me the Titanic was never spoken about in their household, but it wasn't for the reasons that they thought, because of the curse that Jane had put on the ship. It was because of all this cover-up, that whatever happened that day at the yard, that the bodies somehow they have been swapped. But then it's up to yourselves to come to your own conclusions. It's not set in stone, but it's just the information that's there. I mean, the family have all accepted that this ties up a lot of loose ends, and it's answered a lot of questions for them. The fact also that now we can remember poor young George. The thing is, George and Samuel both had the same mother. Their fathers were brothers. They were 2 years in age, so they would have looked very similar. So it would have been very easy to pass one of them off as the other. Even maybe for Jane, for the compensation, because she knew if they knew George was the one who died, she wouldn't have received any money, which she didn't. She only got the 16 shillings. So as I say, all the family agree with what we've kind of come up with. But it's up to yourselves if you want to, you know, I'm not saying, as I say, it's set in stone, whatever conclusions you think. But to me, it makes perfect sense. And it's lovely to see, I think, to see this man that we all thought had lost his life that day. But it's sad that we don't have a photo of George or be able to remember him. Okay, folks, that's it.
Thank you so much, Jeanette, for recounting to us the details of your research that led to the discovery of the two Scott brothers, who it seems were switched. For whatever reason, we cannot be sure, but you did allude to that in the compensation payout. 16 shillings is a mere £65 roughly in today's money. Not sure what that is or in euros or dollars, but And you're right, it would have been very unlikely that Harland & Wolff would have given any payout to them. Now, could Harland & Wolff have been fined if they were known to have employed an underage, child, as it were? And were they in on a collusion? Was there a cover-up between Jane Scott and Harland & Wolff? We just don't know. When she went along, supposedly to identify her son in the Royal Victoria Hospital, she would have known instantly which child it was. Was Samuel even at work that day? Was he off? Was he sick? But obviously every penny counted for income in a family, especially such a large family. So in his place as a catch boy went the brother George, and that is the only thing we can presume. Now, before we go to questions from any of our listeners, viewers tonight, I wanted to ask you one thing. What do you think should happen to the headstone that's up in the city cemetery that was unveiled in 2011? Should it be revised, or do you think an information panel placed at the graveside giving details of the new evidence would be more appropriate?
I think it would be wrong to get rid of the gravestone. That's yeah, because it was put up for a reason. No, I think it would. No, I think it wouldn't be right to get rid of it. But maybe some information, because, as I say, because George is lying in there and he doesn't exist, that it would be nice. But yeah, I think something just to update. Well, the records have been updated already, so that they know that, you know. But yeah, something would be nice just to remember George, you know.
We have a question from one of our American members, Jill Carlier. Would you like to unmute there, Jill, and ask your question?
Hi there. I don't know if I really had a question, but I did put in the chat that I guess I'm trying to adjust the news, just as I have known Nicola for several years, and I had her come into I run the Titanic book club, and we did a Zoom with her. So I guess I'm just feeling a little sad for her, or maybe some mixed feelings, because I know that she also met a relative of whoever it was at when they, because I think she had part of the process of putting the gravestone up and everything. So I think I'm feeling a little bit heartbroken for her, because I'm not sure how this would be received by her, or how I need to adjust. I like to put a lot of, so this is all very new to me, so I'm just trying to catch up. So I think I would love to talk to you some more, Jeanette, and I like to do my research too. I think that everything's up for debate, or discussion. I don't think we should always take everything at face value, and it does definitely look like you've done a lot of research here. And I know her book was, it was really, his afterlife. And I think she didn't really have a lot of information on him when she did her book.
Well, yes,
yeah,
no, yes.
So I just,
yeah,
go ahead.
Perfectly right, because I mean, I read the book a long time ago. I mean, our children over here in Northern Ireland are given the book in school to read, Spirit of Titanic, because it's so good. I mean, it really is. But from the minute I started finding out about this, I contacted Nicola. So I did, because I knew I didn't want to leave her out of anything that was going on, and I've kept her updated with everything that's been found. So, and she knows everything. And like you say yourself, I didn't want to kind of burst her bubble, but even she says herself that hers was fiction and it was inspired by him. But I've kept her informed all the way through, so she's been very supportive as well. She's been great. So I know I totally understand how you feel. Totally.
Yes, I think
I know, because I like, oh, wow. Yeah, I would love to talk to you more, because this is all fascinating. I'd love to spend more time with this all, because I do, a lot of us Titanic students, if you will, go to Encyclopedia Titanica. That's like everyone's kind of go-to, although we know that there is a lot more out there than, you know, what you might find on that site or other sites. And this is, I think, one of the reasons I love studying Titanic. There's always something new to
Yeah.
discuss or to be revealed, and I really appreciate this. And
Jeanette,
yeah.
Jill was actually asking, could Joseph have had another brother with that middle name? But you didn't come across that in any of the
No,
other
like,
children's
no, I've
certificates.
like I said, I managed to trace all the 12 children and you know what happened to them afterwards as well. So yeah, no, there's no, couldn't no, no. But that's the thing. It was strange that then that Jared thought that his great grandfather and his brother had both had the same name, you know, Samuel Joseph, but one was called Samuel and one was called Joseph. But nobody had questioned that. They just accepted it and got on with their lives.
I have another question from Ed Coughlin. Could you please unmute, Ed, and ask your question?
Hi, Jeanette.
Hello.
Fantastic presentation.
Oh, thank you.
I was looking at it earlier on this evening, just in anticipation of tonight. And what struck me particularly was the closeness of families. You know, when husband number one died, the younger brother was prepared to marry and take the existing brood, which is a fantastic undertaking. And then when husband number two died, I think it was the elder sister or the elder daughter was prepared to take the, 6 of the younger ones and the mom in. I mean, that is unbelievable in today's terms. It's absolutely fantastic.
It is. It's kind of what the story. The best bit about the story really is that what comes to me is how families helped each other out, and apparently at those times younger brothers would have stood in. And I mean, James was a bachelor himself, had no children, so he was free to take Jane on and the children. But the fact that you would do that is you wouldn't think that would happen these days, but then it did. Same as everybody living beside each other to help each other out. You know, it gives you a good insight into how families did work those days. They needed each other, you know.
Yes, very much so, and thank you very much for that. Also, a very interesting reference to Jack the Ripper.
Oh yes, it's fascinating.
I looked that up as well. Talk about wasting your life on the internet, but very, very interesting. I did have one question, but I think in fact I'd no sooner typed it than you answered it.
Oh, hooray! That's wonderful.
Was, whether if Harlan de Wolfe had discovered it was the younger child, George.
Well, you see, the thing is,
compensation had been paid.
Yeah, because the fact that she did only get the 16 shillings, that's when it kind of made sense that, he was, if he'd been over 14, he would have got a lot, Jane would have been entitled to a lot more than that. Also as well, I forgot to point out that in Memel Street, the street that just where Donegal Street was, James Dobbin also lived at number 25. He was the poor man who lost his life in the launch day as well. He lived in number 25 Memel Street. So I thought that was quite an interesting thing to find out as well. So they all the guys that sadly lost their lives building Titanic all lived pretty, stone's throw away from each other, really.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeanette. Yeah, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for that. Louise McMore has a question she would like to ask you. So Louise, if you want to unmute there and ask Jeanette.
Good evening. Hi, Jeanette. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. It was really, really interesting.
You're welcome.
Jeanette, I was just wondering, how did you personally feel when you discovered the potential switch? I mean, were you blown away, flabbergasted? Did you think, oh goodness, what am I unearthing here?
Yeah, it was actually quite frightening more than anything. It sounds exciting now, but it was quite scary because I thought, well, but this is what people have been taught in schools. This is what people read about. To be able to turn that around and say this didn't happen. And I don't really have a background where, I'm not a professional historian. I mean, I just, like I say, I'm a nosy person and I just find out about people. So I was quite nervous. Yeah. It's exciting and nervous at the same time, Louise, I think. Yeah.
I bet. But great work. Well done. And thanks again for the presentation, Jeanette.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Louise. Lisa Ray Curry, you'd like to ask a question of your star pupil, Jeanette, if you want to unmute.
It's only me. Yes, it was really just us to answer like a query from Stephen. I think like it was further up the chat about could George have been sort of mistakenly written down? Was he a visitor to the house previously in the 1901 census? But am I right in thinking that you found his birth certificate?
Yes, yes.
We've got more evidence of him as a person.
Yes, I had it up on the screen there because I sort of put that up there because I thought, well, it was quite relevant. Yeah, no, so we've a birth certificate, his birth record and everything. Yeah, so he's definitely existed.
No death certificate.
No, this is what I can't find. And like I say, he just disappears. There's nothing on a George Scott. Funnily enough, though, actually, there was a George Scott was killed at Harland and Wolff the January after, which was a bit bizarre, which then I was like, what? But it just happens to have the same name. So no, there's nothing. And as I say, the family had never heard of a George. And funnily enough, sometimes when names continue on through families when babies are born, there's no Georges anywhere, funnily enough, none. Plenty more Samuels and Josephs coming out of your ears, but no Georges.
So we're definitely sure there was a George and he was Jane's son.
Definitely.
Yes, there we go.
As sure as we can be.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa.
Stephen Scarth from PRONI has a comment he'd like to make. I don't know if you want to say directly, Stephen, or if you just want me to read it on out.
I think I think you've already just done it.
Right, so it's, you're referring to the census details that aren't always accurate. If the head of the household was illiterate, the enumerator fills in the details. And yes, they did record details of visitors. And you have mentioned it could easily be that George was written in error or was from another branch of the family. That is a possibility, Jeanette, isn't it?
Well, yes, true, yeah. It is true, yeah, because the census weren't 100% accurate. Sure, they weren't, just depending on what was happening that day. I mean, people made mistakes, didn't they, as well, or filled things in that just to try and like give different ages, or so it could. It's possible. It's possible.
Mark Doherty had a question, and I'll unmute him. We'll unmute him as well to say further. But he did wonder, when are you going to write a screenplay about this story?
Just doing it now. As soon as this is over, I'm going to start on it. Yes, it would make a wonderful Kenneth Branagh. I have got him down as who's it going to be now? I can't remember. Who he could be Joe. No, have all my casts sorted. Yeah.
Excellent. Was there anything else you wish to ask or comment on, Mark?
Thank you, Maureen. Yes, indeed. Firstly, thank you, Jeanette, for a wonderful talk. It's been quite an adventure to follow this with you, and I think a professional historian, really. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's really just a nosy person about dead people, so I see no difference between what you've done and a professional historian, because you've been extremely thorough. It is watertight, your findings. And it's just left up to us to wonder about the exact circumstances and the motivation. But I just wanted to make the point as well. It makes it a bit more difficult for historians that these were the humble workers who lived in the little 2-up, 2-down terrace houses, and typically they were buried in unmarked graves because they didn't have much money. So they were probably scraping together the money even to bury their loved ones. And it's poignant to see then that not only George Scott, as we now know, was in an unmarked grave for 100 years, but also Johnny Kelly, who died in the building of the Titanic, and James Dobbins in the family grave, all in City Cemetery. And they are in there just a few steps away from the people who ran the shipyard. Edward Harlan's in there as well, with a very grand burial place, William Perry, etc. So it's poignant to see they're buried in the same patch of ground, the very poorest people and the very richest people at the top of the company.
Yeah. Fascinating. Cemeteries are fascinating places, aren't they, Mark?
Oh yes, a great place to lurk around in good weather.
Every day.
Bad.
Thank you for that, Mark. We've also had a comment or, a question from Kadi Madama. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. Do you want to unmute and ask your question there? Hello, Kadi. Okay, maybe he's not about. He had said that Harrington Wolf had 3 unknown deaths, which show on the Harrington Wolf plaque. So they're on D Street, there's a plaque about them. And he was wondering how 3 workers on the payroll could have been unaccounted for. They haven't been identified. And he was wondering if you could throw any light onto why we do not know the identity of 3 of the 8 known Titanic victims.
Well, actually, that's what I was thinking about. I would love to be able to find out who the other 3 were. That's maybe my next mission, is to do that. But I have tried digging as well. Haven't found anything to date, but I'm sure there's a way that we could find out. The only reason a lot of times, also in the newspapers, it didn't always say, because Maureen, am I right, that Titanic and Olympic being built at the same time, you didn't always know which ship you were working on when you went to work that day. Is that true? So you couldn't necessarily say you were working on the Titanic.
Well, you may have been working on a couple of ships that day, depending when you'd finished off your job. Only for the newspaper reports specifically indicating that this was yard number 401, brackets Titanic, that Simon Joseph Scott was working on, or George, we may not have known. And it has been estimated that for every 1,000 tons of ship built, there was 1 fatality or injury, which is a shockingly high statistic in today's, standards. So many of them haven't been identified because the ship number wasn't put against them. You'd have been sent out by your foreman to go and work on this vessel, that vessel. Don't forget that it wasn't just Titanic that was being worked on during the time of construction. There were other vessels, other works going on within the shipyard at the same time. Many people seem to forget that. At the time, there were 15,000 workers employed at Harrington Wolf, and of those, we estimate around 3,000 actually worked on Titanic's construction. So, yep. And I would love to identify the other 3 victims as well and give them recognition.
Yes.
I have tried doing a little bit of amateur sleuthing myself, but to date haven't come up with anything unless family members have anything that may come to light, but sadly not. We also have comment from Iolanda. Iolanda, do you want to unmute and mention what you had said in the chat box about the Guinness Brewery? No, I'll say it anyway. So Iolanda mentioned it also happened in the Guinness Brewery, where a brother took on the name of his brother and his birth certificate in cases where he was under legal working age. So this may not be an isolated incident. Right. And Iolanda says she's come across this several times whilst documenting the medical records in the Guinness Brewery. So
there you go.
I just know doing my own family tree, there have been quite a few inconsistencies in stories that have been passed down to me compared to the official records archives that I have seen. For whatever reason, these have been changed. Have we any other questions at all that anyone would like to put to Jeanette? No, that seems to be it, does it? Oh, sorry, Dee from Canada. You have something you'd like to mention as well to Jeanette?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much, Jeanette, for this fascinating information. And like you say, we take what we wish from the information, but it certainly is, from my perspective, history changing. And being a Canadian and president of Titanic Society of Atlantic Canada, I'm very excited to learn this information. There are a few of our members actually who are joining the call today, or joining the meeting, and we'll be happy to discuss this further. And from the Canadian connection, do you have more information on the family who lived in Toronto so that this is another chapter to me, another Canadian chapter of Titanic that we can start to research and find out more information on.
Oh yes, I mean that as I said, there's quite a few of the members moved to Canada. Joseph himself moved, Samuel Joseph moved over, but he moved back in 1925, so he didn't stay. But his younger brother Victor stayed, and the McCourts, they all stayed. So there was quite a lot. And the guy I've been talking to, Richard Gould, lives in Canada, and he's one of the ancestors. So there's quite a few. So I mean, if you could, whatever way, Maureen, that you could maybe help put me in touch with Dee and give anybody any more information that they need, I'm more than happy to share anything. Yeah,
we could connect, and you can provide some of those names and some of the
yes, and I know Richard was more than happy to talk about it all, you know, and happy to use photos, and the family have been very supportive, very helpful. Yeah,
I was actually going to ask that as well, if they're willing to provide the information.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that.
No problem.
Appreciate it.
Jeanette, has the family mentioned what they would like to happen with the headstone, and are they thinking at all about erecting a headstone at Samuel Joseph Scott proper burial site up in Milltown Cemetery?
Well, they haven't really mentioned anything, to be honest now. Though Gerard did say, I wonder would they have to change the gravestone. It's funny, I haven't actually been in contact with anybody in Northern Ireland relatives wise. They're always overseas, so I haven't really mentioned it that much. I don't think, you know, it's funny because I didn't want to tread on anybody's toes doing all this, so I checked with everybody along the way that everybody was happy with all this information to come out. So and when I first was going to go public with it all, Gerard, I made him check with his mum, who's Samuel Joseph's granddaughter, you know, and it took him a week to get back to me, which worried me because I thought, oh my goodness. But he says he wanted to speak to everybody and just make sure everybody was happy with it, and he said that they were. So it's quite a sensitive thing as well. So, but I mean, I'll be able to find out, probably maybe start that conversation about the gravestone. But at the minute, I think it's just taking in everything that we've found out, you know.
I know this evening we're delighted to have Anthony Rogan from the Belfast City Cemetery project. I'm putting you on the spot, Anthony. Would you like to say a word at all to the attendees this evening about the project that you're involved in at Belfast City Cemetery?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Maureen. You have put me on the spot now, so I probably will not speak as well as Jeanette has just done. But hi, everyone. Yeah, I was speaking to Jeanette a few weeks ago regarding this story, and it was fascinating. Just as everybody has said tonight, it's just a fascinating story. But yeah, I'm engagement officer for the Belfast City Cemetery. I work for the City Council, and just in the last few years, we've received funding for a heritage project, and we have a visitor centre being built hopefully within about the next year or so. But what we're trying to do is engage and promote the cemetery as an asset throughout Belfast and beyond, and just promote the history of the story of it and the people who lived the amazing lives in that. The most well-known ones, obviously, but also those people who, unfortunately, I think someone alluded to earlier, they may not have had the means to have a headstone erected, and try and bring those stories of the people who are there. It's a great representation of the history of Belfast. So I'm in the post just coming up to about a year now. So this story here has just, you know, it's just been amazing timing for me. So yeah, we're interested in just connecting with people throughout Belfast, throughout Ireland, throughout the world, people who have a connection and an interest in the history of Belfast and beyond. And as I say, it's just about trying to promote the cemetery and the rich history that it has. So I have another 2 or 3 years in my post at the minute anyway, and hopefully it'll continue on. But we're off to a great start with the likes of these developments that Jeanette has kindly researched and produced. So yeah, I'm happy also if anyone was interested in the cemetery or any more information they might need or that I can help with, I'm more than happy to share my email address with you guys, and I'll answer or help with any questions you have along the way. So yeah, thank you again tonight for everything. It's been fascinating.
Thank you very much, Anthony. That has been brilliant. We really appreciate it. I have so many of my relatives that are buried up in the city cemetery, and I am really looking forward to seeing the final project once it's all finished. It sounds amazing.
Maureen, sorry, could I devise this out? There's a restoration project going on also, I should have mentioned, for there's 11 B-listed monuments in the cemetery, and there's a brilliant, it's being catalogued on social media, and we hope to have a video of it, but there's a restoration project from the cast iron 3-tier fountain to the central steps where Everett Hardin and Gallagher are buried. So there's a restoration engagement, the new visitors centre being built, along with online facilities where you'll be able to go online and search the history of the various graves in the cemetery. So watch out for developments along those lines. Hopefully within the next year it'll be all finalised. So as I say, keep an eye out for that.
Brilliant. Would you be able to put the details into the chat box so that our members can follow that? That would be brilliant. Thank you very much, Anthony. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Just
Ian.
finally, before I wrap things up, Jeanette, Jill wants to know your CV. She joined us a bit late, Jill Carlier, and she didn't catch the beginning where you mentioned your credentials. So would you just like to give us a brief, well, the fact that you worked in Titanic Belfast for 7 years is a big factor.
Yes, I worked in Titanic Belfast for 7 years, on board the Nomadic as well. Got the chance to work on there. So it was the last White Star Line ship, still in one piece, which was wonderful. I've always been interested in history. Work in the Ulster Museum at present, actually. Sorry, I forgot to mention that, in the education department. So we go out to schools. We're doing like online teaching at the minute with schools not able to come to us with the pandemic and that, so we're doing like online teaching as well. So obviously all children P5 age about 8 or 9 in Northern Ireland would learn about the Titanic. Recently, the jobs that have been given recently, which are all involve history, which is wonderful, because for years I was just doing sort of retail jobs, things like that. So it's kind of like, it's a passion I've always had, but it's just been bubbling under the surface. So now it's kind of coming to the fore.
What's your next project? Anything interesting that we should know about?
I'll have a lie down after this. I'm sure I'll think of something.
Fantastic. Well, listen, I'm going to wrap the meeting up now. It has been absolutely brilliant to hear your talk, Jeanette, as you've gone through the different slides and told it to us. It is one amazing story, this twist of what we believe is Switch brothers. And it just goes to show there is always something new to learn in the Titanic world. You never done learning. There's always new stories surfacing. And this is one that has really captured the Belfast public who are interested in the Titanic story very much to heart. And worldwide, this story has gone out, and we know there's been a lot of media interest in it recently. And our Jeanette's a star. She's been on the radio today. She's going to be on the radio again on Wednesday talking about this. And if anyone wants to learn more and to read the article, you'll just have to join and become a member of the Belfast Titanic Society, as we have published the full article relating to the talk in this issue of CQD. So once again, thank you very much, Jeanette. And thank you to all our members from near and far who have joined us. And we want to wish everyone a safe and happy Christmas. And here's hoping that 2021 will be a better year for us all. So thank you very much once again. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye, Jen.